I love it when a plan comes together. Uh, this is Season 3, Episode 4, Babs C. This is the episode in which Babs, a cousin of Scootaloo, comes... not Scootaloo, Apple Bloom, visits from Manhattan and turns into a bully. And then bullying happens and antics happens and they decide to get back at her, but that doesn't work, so then they do something else, and then everyone's happy at the end. This episode sucks. It's the worst episode ever. But now that we've gotten that out of the way, I actually have some pretty complicated thoughts about this one, which I kind of want to save for the end. So let's just get started with the normal stuff at the first. You ever been excited to meet someone you've never met before who's like, hey, you know, they share your interests and they're cool and all that? In fact, actually, not to speak personally, but I remember my cousin actually being very excited to meet and hang out with me at one point in time because he was, oh my god, he actually likes video games, was the connecting point. And then I spent a large amount of that particular visit to my grandparents trying to avoid my cousin. Yet what? He wanted to hang out with me all the time, and I wanted just a few minutes to myself every now and again, okay? I'm sociable, but I'm not that sociable. God. Anyways, but no, I kind of get it. I do. So, you know, super excited, yeah. And you'll also notice there's two moments in this episode where in a brief fit of emotional outburst, Sweetie Belle actually has a little bit of sparks coming out of her horn, and Scootaloo hovers for just a few seconds. Just interesting to think about, especially considering the fact that, you know, we've already shown that they are weaker in both aspects than other people, and that they haven't fully developed yet, and we know that that's how that works, and blah, blah, blah. Just little tiny bits of continuity that I like in the background there. So, Babs gets off of the train, and she looks really uncertain, really hesitant, really shy. Now, obviously, the episode is trying to make it clear that this is directly connected to the fact that she is here to try and recover from bullying. More on that in a bit. But, I mean, it makes perfect sense anyways, right? You're in a place you've never been to before, meeting people you've never met before. Duh, right? I mean, I know this is MLP and this is Ponyville, but there's still the uncertainty and nervousness that's going to be there from just being in a new place. Again, duh. But then... there's actually probably the cutest scene in the episode where they start to show off the clubhouse. Have you ever worked on something and then been really proud of it and wanted to show it off to someone whose opinion you cared about? I know I said that really vaguely, but that applies to so many situations. Like how many times you've wanted to share a song you've written with someone, or some story you've written, or maybe like a painting you've made, or maybe you're working on something in the garage. You know, you've been doing some woodworking. Maybe you've actually gotten this mechanism that you've been trying to get working. Maybe you've finished a paint job on the house. And you just, oh yeah, look, and then there's this, and then there's that, and there's this and that and that and this, you know, just all sorts of things. And yeah, by the way, this episode, well, there's a lot of really tiny things, none of which were big. I think I'm just going to give a flat continuity counter for the episode in general. Just a few little things. Anyways, so, you know, they're just like, oh my gosh, look at all this stuff we made. And Babs is just standing there like, I'll get more to that in a minute, but then they're like, okay, we've got a good idea. We've got to impress her. That's what the problem is. Speaking as someone who's studied human psychology and mentality for most of my life, I always find it fascinating to watch other people interact with each other. I have seen kids basically interact with each other just like the CMCs and Babs did. In real life, I've seen that several times. It's really cute. Like, you'll see them and be like, oh, look, here's this thing, and I know how this thing works. And I'm going to show you how this thing works. Aren't you impressed that I know how this thing works? Oh, yeah, well, you know that thing. Oh, that thing, huh? I don't know much about that thing. Go quiet. Not sure what to say. Awkward. I like this thing. It's really cute. It's just fascinating watching humans interacting with each other, especially when they're still learning how to interact with each other. And it's just, again, we see that the children here are actually written pretty well. Which is impressive, because most of the time in fiction, children are written to be tiny adults, which I do think is a flaw. I myself have problems writing adults. But yes, Babs is extremely uncomfortable. I said I'd circle back to that, and here we are. She is very obviously and overtly trying to hide and avoid things. And every time now this is important. Every time the Cutie Mark Crusaders bring up the fact that she's a blank flake, she immediately flips her tail to hide it. This actually happens twice in short succession, too. Now, that's important because they weren't teasing her, making fun of her, mocking her. In fact, they were proudly showing off their own lack of cutie mark. And in response to that, she immediately wilted and just kind of withdrew into herself and hid her own blank flank with her tail. That shows that's actually important to keep in mind for later, as something I'm going to bring up. But it very clearly and very visually shows just how much it's been bothering her. Or perhaps slightly more accurately, how much she's been bothered. But like I said, I'll get to that in a second. So, then Silver Spoon and Diamond Tiara show up. For some reason. And what we have happening is typical bullying. I've actually called this out before. Typical bullying is what I call stupid bullying. It's also the easiest thing to avoid if you're thinking about it for a second. And that is, hey, Sierra Mike, your name starts with an S. God, that's so stupid. Typical bullying is when you point out the obvious facts that there's nothing wrong with them, like the fact that you drink water or eat food, and try to turn that into a thing that you can make fun of. That's typical bullying. I have encountered that many times in my life, and I've seen plenty of other people do it, too. Actual bad bullying, because it gets so much worse than that, is much worse than that. So, typical bullying, right? And if you're paying attention, every single one of the things they do is fully typical bullying. Hey, look, they made a pumpkin. Ooh, they're going to take it to the float. And, like, my first thought is, yeah, you know, it's harvest related, so, you know. I have no joke. I actually had a kid try to make fun of me for drinking water once. Oh, it was actually from a fountain. He was like, "Oh, yeah, gonna take water from the fountain now?" And I will never forget my reaction to that because I just started laughing, and he completely melted. Like he was doing like this, and then I just started laughing at his face because it was so funny, and he just started going, "What's so funny? What's so funny? Why are you laughing at me?" And I'm just like, I was drinking water, dude. And I just laughed and walked away. That was thankfully in just before high school when I had actually gotten a lot more used to bullying and how to deal with it. Because earlier I probably would have slugged him. But I'll get more to that in a minute. Anywho, moving on. So then Babs decides to flock to safety. Very, very, very common human psychological thing. We do that as adults. Well, okay, do I accept my own opinion? Do I voice my own opinion, my own perspective on things? Or do I just kind of say what they're saying, and therefore I get to be accepted by their group? Right? I mean, I'm sorry, we do that in real life as adults. Never mind kids. Kids do that a lot. There's the reason you ever hear about the cliques in school. It's because kids do that sort of automatically. Tribal mentality, right? Very simple. And yeah, you'll notice that Babs does actual bullying. She goes a step up from actual bullying. I want to point that out because I think that's another bit of evidence for something I'm going to build up to later. But I want to point out that Babs actually starts causing real damage and actually does physical harm repeatedly to both them and the things around them. She steps up to what I would refer to actual bullying as opposed to typical bullying. Both are bad. I'm not trying to say they're not, but it is an important distinction. Then there's something happens I don't actually want to talk about yet. In fact, I want to save it for last. But basically she says, "What are you, a snitch?" And she insists, and they're like, "No, we can't go and talk to Applejack. Let's just move on from that for right now. I want to really address that point." However, the next thing that happens is they decide the best possible tactic, other than snitching, is to go ahead and practice avoidance. In my experience, avoidance doesn't really work when it comes to, you know, bullying, especially real bullying. There was this one time I was walking around school, and there were these two bullies that decided to walk behind me. And they just walked behind me the entire time I was walking to school, being like, whatever. I actually don't remember what they were saying, because I was actually ignoring them, because I was reading. And they just kept at it. And every time I did any little thing, I remember they would pull it. Oh, he's pulling out his backpack now. Whoa. Right? Avoidance is certainly not a terrible idea. However, the problem is avoidance only works in very, very specific circumstances. Very specific slices of circumstance. And while actual real-life circumstances are worse, because, of course, real life is worse than My Little Pony, the fact is that the episode does very clearly show that avoidance doesn't work, especially not long-term. Now, it's all done across a bubblegum song, which is actually surprisingly good, but still, you know, point made. This then leads to, okay, we've got to deal with things, so we've got to fight back. Okay, we could tell Applejack, no! Again, I'll come back to that in a minute. So they go to the point where they're, all right, we're going to make a new float, and we're going to sabotage it, and we'll get revenge. Revenge! Okay, cool. Now, first I have to point something out. So this episode has a lot of references in it. I mean, you notice the dark side reference, but it's got like several, 8 or 9, little out-of-character references for the people watching. I mean, obviously, I mentioned the bubblegum song later on. There's an A-Team montage, for God's sakes. But you'll notice that the one person who really wants to snitch most is Sweetie Belle. She consistently brings that up. Yeah, this is not the first A-Team montage we've seen, too. Sweetie Belle consistently wants to be the snitch. How many of you are already getting it? Because what happens is Sweetie Belle ends up getting coated in the golden glitter paint. So she's the golden snitch. I've never gotten that before. But I was actually in the middle of jotting down my notes about snitching, which we're going to get to in a second here. And I happened to look up, and they were doing the glitter paint. I remember thinking the glitter paint looks really cool, and then I was like, oh, there's no way that's not on purpose. Come on. Props, Miss whoever you are. Who wrote this one? Cindy Morrow, that's it. This is a Cindy Morrow episode. Anyways. So, moving on. They have the A-Team montage. It's good stuff. And we get to the parade. By the way, the crepes, I mean, granted, I'm hungry. It's basically lunchtime for me, but oh man, the thought of parade crepes right now sounds really good. Anywho, I love how terrible of liars the CMC are. They are so bad at it. And it's so obvious. They even have a mattress dragged over for when they inevitably get knocked into it. I mean, come on. Now, hang on. We're not there yet, Darth Timer. Hang on. Give me a second. I really want to talk about the snitching thing, because I do have some complex thoughts on that. I really want to address that separately, though. Yeah, poor Spike. Poor Spike. Anyways, so, you know, they lie terribly and get convince Babs to take over the thing, and blah, blah, blah. We're all good. Cool. And yeah, of course, they're bad liars. They're good people, which actually is a good distinction to show visually, especially to a child. And this leads to the big thing. Actually, no. Before I just want to mention, hey, Pinkie Pie, let us in. I will admit the first time I saw that, I didn't get that at all. And I was just like, why is she laughing about that? Oh. Anywho, why'd she make a float out of real lettuce? So they don't say it outright. So now we're going to finally talk about this. There are several signs that Babs, what she experiences back in Manhattan, is what I have earlier defined as real bullying. Not typical bullying, real bullying. I've already given several pieces of evidence for this, but probably the final and most important one is when they find out from Applejack that Babs has specifically come to Ponyville to recover. That she has been through enough crap that she is either coming here of her own volition or her parents have sent her here so she can be away from that. Now, what we're picturing is probably still too severe because this is still My Little Pony. I doubt they get into the next step of bullying, which is past real bullying, because there's much worse than real bullying. Trust me. Like you get into actual psychopathy at a certain point. But anyways, there is another step past real bullying, and I don't think that even exists in this setting. Nevertheless, real bullying does demonstrably on camera, and that's probably what Babs has been having to deal with while she's up in Manhattan. So she's come out of here to recoup, and that leads to them being like, oh god, we gotta take care of her, which leads to interesting thought processes. So they say that we were going to be bullies too. Let me go ahead and start by saying that I don't agree with that. Like, ignoring the fact that that what they're doing was wrong. Let's ignore that for the second. I absolutely do not think that what they were doing was bullying. My opinion. We're going to get a lot into opinion here, by the way, because nothing I'm about to say is correct, merely my own personal thoughts on things. Snitching, right? And yeah, they booby-trapped their own float in order to try and get her mildly... I mean, come on. What they are doing to her is literally less than what Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon do to them. But again, let's not get into that. Because the whole point is that they are feeling... They feel like they're feeding into a cycle of revenge, which is a real thing, and that they could have approached this better. Now, that I agree with. They could have approached this better. But again, this brings me back to that whole snitching thing. First and foremost... This is something I have worked extremely hard to impress upon my niece, and I know Sis has as well, her mother. Because there's a difference between running to an adult when you have any problem and trusting an adult that you know and trust to take care of things and keeping them in on the loop. There's actually a pretty big gap between those two things. One of the things that they kept pushing back when I was in California in grade school was if you have any issue whatsoever, you run and get a teacher. I didn't do that. You know why I didn't do that? Because I didn't trust the teachers to actually do their damn job, because I lived in California. Hang on. I can think of 2 teachers in grade school who I would have trusted with that. And I actually went to one of them once. And she did actually have my back on that. Sorry. Need to make that clear distinction. She was cool. We hung out outside of school, too, sometimes. She was pretty neat. But the point is, the attitude of you need to run and immediately get an adult for anything, first and foremost, now, again, opinion. Like I already gave the preface, this is all opinion. But first and foremost, I don't think that that is a good attitude to engender into human beings in general. I don't think run to the authorities is the best attitude to have for all circumstances. I do think having someone you can talk to and trust is a good attitude. You know, again, going to my mother or going to that one teacher or whatever, you know, there is a legitimate and valuable essence in going and talking to a trusted authority figure and actually trying to confess and confide within them. Yeah, no kidding, we odds. Yeah, so to be clear, and this is relevant to the episode, I do think they should have gone to Applejack immediately. But I do think the attitude of run no matter what is a bad one. And that's why I say I have complicated thoughts on this episode, because they kind of dance around this topic a few times. Sweetie Belle several times brings up the idea of going and talking to Applejack. And several times the other two are like, nah, 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 nah. They should have. They absolutely should have. If absolutely nothing else, talking to Applejack would have brought new information into the equation of why this was happening. Because you notice, as soon as they figure out why this was happening, they're able to reach out with a measure of understanding and actually connect with Babs rather than unintentionally ostracizing her. You noticed that, right? Like at the beginning of the episode, Babs is not part of the clique. And that's one of the reasons she's so shy and awkward and unpleasant. Right? It is not when she is offered the chance to join another clique that she immediately slides into it with the bullying. And she does that specifically as a defense mechanism because, let's be honest, bullies tend to be people who are bullied. There we go. Let's go ahead and line that one up properly. That is actually a thing that is true. That's not the realm of opinion. That's a demonstrable fact. And I don't even want to get into how people's home lives can affect that, so let's just move on from that topic for a moment, because that's just a morass of unpleasant, swampy death. So, obviously they should have gone to Applejack. Here's the thing. At the end of the episode, there's this bit where they actually have Silver Spoon and Diamond Tiara typical bullying them right in front of Applejack. You caught that, right? It's one of the last scenes in the episode. They're just like, ha ha, you're so stupid and dumb. And Applejack doesn't say or do anything. However, in the interests of fairness, she also doesn't really get a chance to, because Babs stands up for herself. Now, she doesn't do so in an overt way. She doesn't punch them. But she does say, I'm going to go tell your mothers. But then the episode just has to get that comeuppance in and show them getting tossed into the mud. So there is actually a physical consequence for their bullying. So this just bounces back and forth between between its own Aesop and the ideas it's trying to posit. And I have a very strong feeling there was at least some executive meddling with this one about what message we want to send kids, Because it feels like there was disagreements in what actually got into the episode amongst the writers, or amongst the writer and the creators, I should say. This stuff could be massaged into making sense with itself, but I really feel the inconsistency is pretty overt, especially since they go way out of their way to show visually exactly why this situation is functioning, and show how the bullying works and typically, and then they also show haha comeuppance in a very kid-friendly way, a very Nickelodeon way, but they still do show them literally covered in mud, and one of them gets compared to a pig in the exact same manner that they were going to get revenge on Babs. Mud, pig, embarrassed. It is point for point the exact same thing. Honestly, yes, Savacom. As I've pointed out before, one of the great tools in the arsenal of My Little Pony is the fact that there doesn't have to be some thread of the week every episode. It's something that I've said many times is one of the biggest weaknesses of Star Trek, is that there's this need to have a thread of the week, which is why 99% of episodes have some thread of the week, even if it's stupid and has nothing to do with anything. Even in otherwise excellent episodes, by the way, there's an amoeba eating us! Oh, and now back to the real episode. In an episode of MLP, you don't need the thread of the week. You could just have it be about coping and dealing with this kind of crap. Truth be told, I don't have a solution for bullying myself. You know how I fixed bullying? I beat the crap out of them. I'm not particularly proud of that, but I'm also not ashamed of it. I've told these stories before. Anybody who's watched my show knows that back in school, people would approach me and start to bully me, and I'd give them one chance. I'd be like, no, excuse me, I'm just trying to go through the bathroom. And they'd shove back, and then I would beat the crap out of them. Yeah, don't start it, finish it. That's pretty much exactly what my mom taught me. I never started nothing. The thing is, I'm not sure that's really the best option. Even though that is my solution. That is what I actually did in school. And occasionally I actually got in trouble for it, like twice. No, I'm going to go with once, actually. I got in trouble for that once. But yeah, I'm not sure this really applies to everyone. I mean, first of all, I'm kind of a big kid, and I've always had a mean punch. So I literally have the physical ability to actually beat the crap out of someone, which someone else may or may not have. Second of all, I've taken self-defense lessons since I was 4. Military family. Military and medical family. Right? So obviously that's not just a universal answer. But I don't think run and try to run to the nearest authority figure is a universal answer either, especially given how much that one doesn't work either. And that's why I say I don't have a solution for bullying. As an adult, I do. As an adult, if my niece came to me and said bullying is happening, then I'm going to deal with that permanently. No, it's not what you're thinking of. I mean, I'm going to deal with that like an adult. I'm going to approach that other kid's parents and teacher, and we're going to have some talk and some words. And depending on what is said will determine what happens next. But I can only say that as an adult. I don't have a solution for someone who's already 8, right? Or 10, or 12, or 14, or whatever. Man, I wish, Lord Harrimount. In an ideal world, authority figures would be decent people. In my experience, they are not. With exceptions. Actually, several of my high school teachers were pretty cool, too. Though that was literally another state, so... No, I haven't heard of that one, Weodes. What would you do, Lord Harrimount? This is just a hypothetical, obviously, but let's imagine you're a kid and you're getting bullied. Let's assume typical bullying. Let's not go into real bullying. Let's assume you get typical bullied and you go to the teacher and the teacher is like, well, stop causing trouble. And basically the teacher is part of the problem. What do you do at that point? Like, what if going to the teacher is removed as a potential answer? Go to your parents. Okay, that's valid. Assuming you actually can trust and have decency in that. Funnily enough, I was thinking Darth Tyron's answer. Did I ever tell you guys that I've been friends with most of my principals in school? I was actually good friends with my principal when I was in high school. I never got that preemptive, Pyro. Honestly, I probably should have a few times. I'm sure I've told you guys the story of the kid who dropped his entire cafeteria tray of food and milk over my head in the middle of the lunchroom, right? That kid regretted that. I almost got suspended over that one. I know I've told this story. That's when Mom went to bat for me. That's when she stepped up and was like, no, you're not suspending him. But he beat the crap out of him. Uh-huh. I know I've told this story. It's the one where one of the teachers, this is actually one of the worst teachers I had back in school, insisted that there is absolutely no excuse whatsoever for ever getting physical with someone. So Mom, this is the truncated version of the story, but Mom provoked her deliberately until, she tried to hit my mother physically. And that pretty much made her point. And Mom turned to the principal and was like, so, no excuse for ever physically hurting someone. So I wasn't suspended. It's really sad, by the way. That exact school that I was almost suspended for that in, I can name 3 other instances when I had to beat the crap out of someone there. I never had any issues with that. You know why? Because there was no crowd. There was no audience. The only reason that last one was an issue is because it was in the middle of a crowded lunch hall. God. Anyways, I'm getting a little into the weeds here. I apologize. He was just a dick, Savacom. He was just a dick, and that's really all there was to it. I think in that specific case, it was because I liked video games. At that point, it would have been like the early SNES stuff. But yeah. You know, I was a nerd, right? So, I was a nerd who hit pretty hard. I'm sorry. Moving on. The episode, like I said, I don't know what I really think of this episode. To actually get back to this point for a second here. Is there an idea to the idea of the bully that keeps the other bullies in line? I've never seen that myself, Imperial Star Destroyer. The theory is sound, but I've never seen it personally. So I don't know. I can't speak to that one. I grew up with the weirdest schooling experience. I grew up with school in California, which, if you don't understand why I keep mentioning that, the schools in California were garbage when I was growing up. And then the schools in Kansas, which were a lot better. So I've had a bit of a bipolar experience in my schooling. But in this specific episode, I do think that bullying is something that needs to be addressed. But I really do firmly believe that reaching out to Babs was the right call. The problem is they did that to begin with. Right? I mean, the fact of the matter is that they actually reached out to Babs right at the beginning. And they were incredibly enthusiastic, incredibly embracing of her. And then she decided to go ahead and pull the defensive mechanism. That you could say the method was flawed, and I would agree. But the problem is, I feel like the episode could have been a little better constructed if either they didn't reach out to begin with, or again, they reached out and then the episode was about dealing with it, dealing with the consequences of her bullying, helping Babs to open up and try to be a little more accepting of the fact that there are people who are not like Bragwin's teachers were. Because there are. I know there's good teachers out there. I've met them. I've met good teachers as an adult. Right? It's important to acknowledge that the all clause does not exist for a child. And I think, as weird as this may sound, that would be the ESOP I would push here. That you can't apply one solution linearly and universally to a problem. You can't just keep avoiding, you can't always fight back, and you can't always run to the teacher. That is what I would push if I was to rewrite and restructure this episode. It also probably doesn't help that, yeah, Diamond Tiara and Silver Spoon get away basically scot-free in this episode. And Babs herself, who, I remind you, does worse than typical bullying, gets a complete, the red in her ledger gets completely wiped out. There's no consequences whatsoever. And that's weird in a show that tends to like to show things like consequences. So, ultimately, well, I kind of applaud the general gist of the episode. I think they kind of fell flat on exactly where they wanted to go with this one. My opinion. Question is it green or yellow? I think I'll make it yellow. make this a yellow episode. I've been color coding them as I go, because it's me and I'm organized. Telling you, Twilight and I, we could have discussions about organizational methods. Yeah, Pinky just eats your float. Don't get caught. Yeah. I suppose, Lord Harrowmont. But at the same time, you remember the episode, the Valentine's Day episode, where they poison, let's call it what it is, Big Mac and Cheerilee. I had to think about their names there. And they, you know, they have the love poison and blah, blah, blah. And at the end of the episode, they legitimately learn their lesson, and they are legitimately sorry, and they do work to make things up. However, they still have consequences for that. You remember that? I'm not saying we need to flog Babs. I'm just saying this is the kind of thing where you should show, okay, you know, what you did was wrong. We need to fix this. I am a very big fan of consequences in real life as well as in fiction. That's all I'm saying about that part. It is important that she understands, and kids understand that what she did was crossing the line, and that needs to be shown on camera. My opinion. So, anywho, I've given my thoughts. I feel this episode could use restructuring. How many color codes are... So right now I have... It's the exact same color codes I use on the website, actually. It's blue, green, yellow, red, purple. There's no orange, I guess. I could add an orange, but it's the same ones. Purple being best, blue being worst. I only have one blue episode so far. Over a Barrel. I hated that episode. Like, it's not Lamentation status, but it's probably the most Lamentations episode I've covered so far. Yeah, one time, Sarah Mike, I actually hit a kid with a stool, and afterwards I was like, all right, I'm going to go see the principal, who I was a friend with, as I mentioned. And I walked in, I was like, hey, I just had a fight. She's like, okay, go ahead and go home for the next couple days. I was like, okay. And that was it. Like, everyone was pretty blasé about it, probably because it was me. But it was like, yep, I'm suspended for a few days. This is on my record. I accept. It was worth it. Anyways, he called my music porn music, if you're wondering what actually set me off. I mean, he had been needling me for, God, like days at that point. But the final thing that was the final piece of straw was he referred to my music as porn music. So I hit him with a stool. Funny fact, much later, years later, he actually saw me at a gas station. I have a good memory. So he walked over. It's like, hey, you remember me? It's like, I'm sorry? You know, to pretend. He's like, you tried to hit me in the art class. I was like, yeah, so? You were stupid. And I said that right to his face. He got red in the face. Like, he was just... He looked like he was going to hit me, and I was just standing there, like, waiting for him to, because I was in the middle of an extremely public gas station with dozens of people around, just waiting for this guy, at this point, over 20, to hit me. He didn't. That was admittedly very satisfying. Oh, I didn't break his teeth or anything, Lord Harrowmont. Come on. I know how to hit someone so that, you know, there's no permanent damage. But I do think that you do need to be willing to fight back. That is something that I've believed my whole life. So, either way, that's why I had to give that big preface about opinion. Because I can only give opinions about a topic like bullying, not facts. I mean, I talk about this in Star Trek, too, if you're paying attention. If a foreign power constantly does war crimes against you, then you should declare war on them. In my opinion. Like I said, and I agree. It is, the trick is to know when. The trick is to know when. So, that's the key part. And that's the real lesson. And I'm going to finally chop this off now that every single one of my viewers has decided to stop watching me.